I stood in my own driveway, staring at a business card that made my blood run cold. Sunset Valley Farm Tour Premium Agricultural Experience, it read. Below that, a photo of my barn, my fields, my life's work. At the bottom, contact information for the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. My hands shook as I flipped the card over. There it was in bold letters. Book your corporate retreat at this authentic working farm. The price listed was $300 per day, for my property, my sanctuary. The place I had built with 15 years of sweat, sacrifice, and every dollar I could scrape together. I looked up at my farmhouse, then back at the card. Tire tracks I did not recognize crisscrossed my carefully maintained pasture. Fresh damage to my fence posts caught the afternoon light. That was the moment I realized they had been running a business on my land for months, and I was about to make them pay for every single penny they stole. 15 years ago, I bought 40 acres of what everyone else called worthless land outside the city limits. Rocky soil, overgrown brush, and a crumbling farmhouse that had seen better days. But I saw potential where others saw problems. I was 28 then, tired of cubicles and conference calls, dreaming of something real, something I could build with my own hands. My friends thought I had lost my mind when I quit my marketing job to become a farmer. Maybe I had. But every morning when I watched the sunrise paint my fields golden, I knew I had made the right choice. Those first years were brutal. I learned farming the hard way, through failed crops and costly mistakes. I rebuilt that farmhouse board by board, installed my own irrigation system, and slowly transformed those 40 acres into something beautiful. By year 5, I was breaking even. By year 10, I was actually making a profit. The farm became my entire world. I grew organic vegetables for the local farmers market, raised free-range chickens, and even started a small honey operation with 6 beehives. Every season brought new challenges, but also new rewards. The land taught me patience, resilience, and the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something meaningful. My property sat just outside the jurisdiction of Meadowbrook Heights, a sprawling suburban development that had grown up around me over the years. Their perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes were a world away from my rustic farm life. We coexisted peacefully. They stayed in their subdivision, and I stayed on my land. The Homeowners Association occasionally sent me invitations to community events, which I politely declined. I had nothing against my suburban neighbors, but we lived different lives. They worried about grass height and fence colors. I worried about weather and crop rotation. Last spring, after 15 years of non-stop work, I finally decided to take a real vacation. Not a long weekend, but an actual 2-week trip to visit my sister in Colorado. It would be my first time away from the farm for more than 3 days since I bought the place. I spent weeks preparing for my absence. I hired Tom, a local teenager, to feed the chickens and water the greenhouse plants. I arranged for my neighbor Jim to check on things daily. I even installed a security camera system, just to be safe. The morning I left, I walked through my fields one last time. The corn was knee-high and healthy. The tomatoes in the greenhouse were just starting to flower. Everything was perfect. I locked the farmhouse, loaded my truck, and headed west with a clear conscience. For 2 weeks, I hiked mountain trails, slept in late, and remembered what it felt like to be completely relaxed. I checked in with Tom twice, and everything was running smoothly. My sister joked that I seemed like a different person without the weight of constant responsibility on my shoulders. I drove home feeling refreshed and grateful. Grateful for the break, but also grateful to be returning to the life I had built. As I turned down the long gravel driveway, I was already planning improvements for the fall season. That feeling lasted exactly 37 seconds. The first thing I noticed was wrong were the tire tracks. Deep ruts carved through my carefully maintained pasture, tracks that definitely had not been there when I left. My stomach dropped as I followed them with my eyes. They led directly to my barn. I parked near the farmhouse and got out slowly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The grass around my barn was trampled flat in a perfect rectangle, like someone had set up tables and chairs. Cigarette butts dotted the ground near my water spigot. A plastic cup with a corporate logo lay crumpled by my fence. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the farmhouse door. Inside, everything looked normal, but something felt off. I could not put my finger on it until I walked into the kitchen and saw it. A business card on my counter. A business card I had never seen before. Sunset Valley Farm Tour, Premium Agricultural Experience. The photo on the front made my knees weak. It was my barn, photographed from the exact spot where I stood every morning to watch the sunrise. My field stretched out behind it, looking pristine and pastoral. At the bottom, in cheerful blue letters, it listed a phone number and email address for the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. I sank into a chair and stared at the card. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe someone used my farm as a backdrop for a photo without permission. That would be bad enough, but at least it would make sense. Then I flipped the card over. Experience authentic farm life at Sunset Valley. Corporate retreats, family gatherings, and educational tour available. Full access to 40 acres of organic farmland, historic barn, and traditional farmhouse viewing. Professional photography sessions welcome. Rate, $300 per day. $300 per day for my property. I called the number on the card with trembling fingers. A cheerful voice answered on the second ring. Meadowbrook Heights HOA, this is Jennifer speaking. Hi, I managed to say. I am calling about the farm tour. Oh, wonderful. Are you interested in booking an event? We have availability this weekend if you are looking for something soon. My vision started to blur around the edges. Can you tell me more about what is included? Absolutely. You get full access to the 40-acre property from sunrise to sunset. The historic barn is perfect for corporate meetings or family gatherings. We provide tables and chairs if needed. The farmhouse itself is off-limits for privacy reasons, but guests love touring the grounds and taking photos by the beehives. The beehives. She was talking about my beehives. How long have you been offering this service? I asked. Oh, it has been very popular. We started about 6 months ago. The property owner is rarely there, so it works out perfectly for everyone. The property owner is rarely there. I lived there every single day, except for the past 2 weeks. I see, I said, and how do I book? Well, this weekend is already booked for a corporate retreat, but I can put you down for next weekend if you would like. I hung up without another word. 6 months. They had been renting out my farm for 6 months, while I was working in my fields, hosting strangers on my property. While I was sleeping in my farmhouse, charging people $300 to tour my life's work. I stumbled outside and started walking my property with new eyes. Now I could see the evidence everywhere. Worn paths through my pasture where none should exist. Trash hidden in my irrigation ditches. Damage to my fence where people had climbed over instead of using the gates. Near my beehives, I found a laminated sign I had never seen before. Please do not disturb the bees. Photos welcome from a safe distance. At the bottom, the Meadowbrook Heights logo. They had put up signs on my property, to manage their customers who were paying them to visit my farm. I pulled out my phone and called Tom, the teenager I had hired to watch the place. "Hey Tom, it is me. Quick question. Did you notice any unusual activity while I was gone? Any visitors or anything?" There was a long pause. What do you mean by unusual?" "People on the property who should not have been here." Another pause. "Well, there was that corporate thing on Saturday, but I figured you knew about it since there were signs and everything. The lady said you were out of town but had approved it." "The lady? What lady, Tom?" "From the HOA. She showed up with like 20 people in business clothes. They had tables and a whole setup. She said it was all arranged and you were getting paid for it." I closed my eyes. "Did she give you any money to pass along to me?" "No, she said they handled all that stuff directly with you." "Of course they did." I hung up and looked around my farm. This place that I had built with my own hands, that I had sacrificed everything to create, had been turned into a commodity. Strangers had been walking through my fields, sitting at tables in my pasture, taking photos of my life's work, all while someone else collected the money. For 6 months. That night I sat on my porch and did the math. $300 per day. If they were booking events even twice a week, that was over $30,000 they had stolen from me. $30,000 earned by renting out property they did not own, did not maintain, and had no right to touch. But the money was not even the worst part. The worst part was the violation of trust, the complete disregard for my rights, and the arrogant assumption that they could just take whatever they wanted because I would never find out. They were wrong about that last part. The next morning, I drove straight to the Meadowbrook Heights HOA office. I needed answers, and I needed them before I did something I would regret. The office was located in a strip mall at the entrance to their subdivision, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Through the glass doors, I could see motivational posters about community pride and working together. Jennifer, the woman I had spoken to on the phone, was exactly what I expected. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a bright smile, and the kind of confident demeanor that comes from never being told no. "Hi there," she said as I walked in. "Are you here about booking the farm?" "Actually," I said, keeping my voice level, "I am the owner of that farm." Her smile faltered for just a moment, then returned full force. "Oh, well then, you must be here about your payments. Let me get Mrs. Patterson for you." She disappeared into a back office, and I heard urgent whispering. A few minutes later, a stern-looking woman in her 60s emerged. Margaret Patterson, according to the nameplate on her desk, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. "Mr. Johnson," she said, extending her hand, "we have been expecting you." That caught me off guard. "You have?" "Of course. Jennifer mentioned you called yesterday asking about the farm tour. We have been meaning to reach out to discuss formalizing our arrangement." I stared at her. "What arrangement?" "Well, the usage of your property for community events. It has been such a wonderful addition to our amenities. We have had so many positive responses from residents and their guests." "Mrs. Patterson," I said slowly, "I never gave you permission to use my property for anything." She looked genuinely confused. "But surely you must have. We would never proceed without proper authorization. Let me pull your file." She rifled through a filing cabinet and produced a thick folder labeled Sunset Valley Farm Community Asset. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, and what looked like contracts. "Here we are," she said, pulling out a sheet of paper. Your agreement to participate in the Community Enhancement Program. I took the paper and examined it. It was a form letter about adding properties to the HOA's list of community amenities. At the bottom was a signature. My signature. Except I had never seen this document before in my life. "This is not my signature," I said. Mrs. Patterson looked at me with what seemed like genuine concern. "Are you sure? It looks quite official to me." I pulled out my driver's license and compared the signatures. They were not even close. "This is a forgery." Her expression hardened. "That is a very serious accusation, Mr. Johnson. And renting out someone else's property without permission is a very serious crime, Mrs. Patterson." The room went silent. Jennifer had stopped pretending to work and was openly listening to our conversation. Mrs. Patterson closed the file and placed her hands on top of it. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said. "Perhaps we should discuss this with our legal counsel present." "I think that is an excellent idea," I replied, "because I am going to need to see every document you have related to my property, every rental agreement you have made, and every penny you have collected." I left the office with a promise that their lawyer would contact me within 48 hours, but I was not about to wait around for their next move. I had research to do. Back home, I started digging into the Meadowbrook Heights HOA online. What I found made my blood boil. Their website had an entire section dedicated to premium community amenities. Listed right between the swimming pool and tennis courts was Sunset Valley Farm, authentic agricultural experience. The description was even worse than the business card. They marketed my farm as a rustic retreat perfect for corporate team building, family reunions, and special events. They bragged about the historic barn, the organic farming operation, and the peaceful rural setting just minutes from suburban convenience. They had professional photos of every inch of my property, photos that could only have been taken by someone with full access to my land, someone who had walked through my fields, entered my barn, and documented my life's work for their marketing materials. But the most infuriating part was the testimonials, glowing reviews from customers who had paid to experience authentic farm life on my property, people raving about the charming rustic atmosphere and educational agricultural tour. One review mentioned how knowledgeable the HOA staff was about organic farming techniques. They were not just renting out my land. They were pretending to be experts on my farming methods while I was not even there. I printed everything, every web page, every photo, every testimonial. Then I started making phone calls. My first call was to Jim, my neighbor who had agreed to check on the farm while I was away. "Jim, did you see any HOA activity on my property while I was gone?" There was a long silence. "What kind of activity?" "Corporate events, tour, people renting the place." Another silence. "Look, I did not want to get involved. They said it was all legal and above board." "So you knew about it?" "They approached me before you left. Said you had worked out a deal with them but wanted to keep it quiet for tax reasons. They offered me $50 to keep an eye on things during events, make sure nobody got out of line." $50. They had paid my own neighbor $50 to help them steal from me. "Jim, I never made any deal with them. They have been operating illegally on my property." "Oh God," he said, "I am so sorry. I thought you knew. They had all these official-looking papers and everything." Paper, official-looking papers with forged signatures. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by printed web pages and tried to calculate how much money they had stolen. Based on their online calendar, they had been hosting events almost every weekend for 6 months. corporate retreats, family gatherings, photography sessions, even a wedding ceremony. A wedding. Someone had gotten married in my pasture while I was feeding chickens 50 feet away, and I had not even known about it. The total came to over $40,000. $40,000 they had earned by illegally exploiting my property, forging my signature, and bribing my neighbor to keep quiet. But as I stared at those numbers, I realized something important. They had kept detailed records of everything. Every booking, every payment, every event. They had created a paper trail that would prove exactly how much they owed me. They thought they were being thorough and professional. Actually, they were building the case against themselves. At 9 a.m. sharp the next Monday, I walked into the law office of Rebecca Chen, the best property attorney in the county. I had called her Friday afternoon and explained the situation. She had agreed to see me first thing Monday morning. Rebecca was exactly what I needed. Sharp, no nonsense, and completely outraged by what the HOA had done. "This is not a property dispute," she said after reviewing all my evidence. "This is organized theft with conspiracy and fraud thrown in for good measure." She spread the HOA's marketing materials across her conference table. "They forged your signature, created fraudulent contracts, and operated a commercial business on your property without permission. In legal terms, this is conversion, trespass, and unjust enrichment." "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked. "It means they owe you every penny they made, plus damages, plus attorney fees, plus potentially punitive damages for the intentional nature of their actions." She picked up one of their testimonials. And this testimonial, where they claim to provide expert agricultural guidance to customers, that is false advertising. They were charging people for expertise they do not have, using facilities they do not own. Rebecca immediately sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop all rental activities and preserve all financial records related to my property. She also filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office and reported the forged signature to local law enforcement. The HOA's response came within 24 hours, and it was not what I expected. Instead of apologizing or trying to negotiate, they doubled down. Their lawyer, a man named Richard Hallbrook, sent a letter claiming that my property was subject to community easement rights that gave the HOA authority to use it for reasonable community purposes. "Community easement rights?" I asked Rebecca. "What does that even mean?" "In this context, absolutely nothing," she replied. "They are making up legal concepts that do not exist, but it tells us they have no intention of backing down quietly." She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, the HOA escalated their attacks on multiple fronts. First, they filed a complaint with the county claiming my farm was in violation of zoning regulations. They alleged that I was operating a commercial agricultural business in an area zoned for residential use, and that my chickens and beehives constituted a public nuisance. Then they filed a lien against my property, claiming I owed them back dues for community services dating back 15 years, services I had never requested and never received. Finally, they sent letters to all my customers at the farmers market, claiming that my organic certification was fraudulent and that my produce was potentially unsafe. "They are trying to destroy your livelihood," Rebecca said. "This is classic intimidation tactics. They think if they make your life miserable enough, you will give up and go away." But their aggressive tactics were also creating evidence of malicious conduct. Every fraudulent complaint, every false claim, Every attempt to damage my reputation was being documented by Rebecca's team. The real breakthrough came during the discovery phase of our lawsuit. Rebecca had the right to examine all of the HOA's records related to my property, and what we found was even worse than I had imagined. They had not just been renting out my farm. They had been systematically targeting other properties in the area, using the same forged signature scheme to claim community easement rights over land they did not own. Mrs. Patterson and the HOA board had created an entire business model based on stealing other people's property. My farm was just their most successful venture. The financial records showed that they had collected over $60,000 from my property alone, not the $40,000 I had calculated. They had been charging premium rates for exclusive agricultural experiences and pocketing every penny. But the most damning evidence was found in their internal emails, which they were required to turn over during discovery. In one email, Mrs. Patterson referred to me as the absentee owner who never pays attention to anything. In another, she bragged about how easy it was to monetize underutilized community assets. The smoking gun was an email exchange between Mrs. Patterson and their marketing consultant about expanding the program. "We need to identify more properties with absent or inattentive owners," she wrote. "Rural properties work best because neighbors are spread out and less likely to notice unusual activity." They had not just stolen from me. They had developed a systematic approach to stealing from people like me. Rebecca filed an amended complaint adding charges of racketeering and operating a criminal enterprise. "This is not just about your farm anymore," she told me. "This is about stopping a pattern of criminal behavior that was targeting property owners throughout the county." The HOA's legal bills were mounting rapidly. Richard Hallbrook was charging them premium rates to defend the indefensible, and their insurance company had already denied coverage for intentional criminal acts. More importantly, other victims were starting to come forward. A local horse farm owner contacted Rebecca after seeing news coverage of our case. The HOA had been renting out his pastures for authentic equestrian experiences without his knowledge. A retired couple discovered that their lakefront property had been marketed as a private fishing retreat for corporate executives. What had started as my personal fight for justice was becoming a class action lawsuit that would expose the full scope of the HOA's criminal enterprise. Mrs. Patterson and the board members were no longer dealing with one angry property owner. They were facing multiple criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and a federal investigation into mail fraud and racketeering. But they still refused to settle. In fact, their response was to escalate even further. They hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, filed additional false complaints with every government agency they could think of, and even tried to have me arrested for trespassing on community property. The irony was not lost on me. They were claiming that I was trespassing on my own land. "They are desperate," Rebecca explained. "They know they are going to lose, and they know the financial consequences are going to be severe. Desperate people do desperate things." She was right about the desperation. What she did not anticipate was just how far they would be willing to go to protect their criminal enterprise. 3 months into the legal battle, Rebecca and I developed a comprehensive strategy that would not only recover every stolen dollar, but ensure the HOA faced serious consequences for their criminal behavior. "We are not just seeking financial recovery anymore," Rebecca explained during one of our strategy sessions. "We are seeking complete justice. That means criminal charges, personal liability for board members, and reforms that will prevent this from happening to anyone else. Our first move was to demand forensic accounting of all HOA finances. We wanted to trace every dollar they had stolen from my property and determine exactly how much personal profit the board members had taken. The results were staggering. Over 18 months, they had collected over $75,000 from my property alone, but that was just the beginning. The forensic accountant discovered that Mrs. Patterson had been paying herself a property management fee of 20% on all rental income. The other board members were receiving consulting fees for their role in marketing the stolen properties. They were not just stealing rental income. They were stealing it and then paying themselves additional fees for managing their own theft. Even worse, they had used HOA funds to pay for professional photography, marketing materials, and website development for their illegal rental business. They had literally forced HOA members to fund their own criminal enterprise through their annual dues. This is embezzlement on top of theft, Rebecca said. Board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the HOA members. Instead, they used member funds to subsidize their personal profit from stolen property. Our second strategy was to go public with the story. Rebecca had connections with investigative journalists who specialized in exposing local government corruption. The story broke on a Wednesday morning with the headline "Local HOA accused of operating criminal enterprise using stolen property." The article detailed everything: the forged signatures, the illegal rentals, the intimidation tactics, and the systematic targeting of property owners throughout the county. By that afternoon, my phone was ringing nonstop. Property owners from across the region were calling to report similar experiences. The local news stations picked up the story. The county prosecutor announced they were opening a criminal investigation. The HOA's response was predictably tone-deaf. Mrs. Patterson held a press conference where she claimed they were being unfairly persecuted for trying to enhance community amenities. She insisted that all their actions were legal and proper, and that I was a disgruntled property owner trying to extort money from a volunteer organization. The press conference was a disaster for them. When reporters asked to see the signed agreements that authorized the property usage, Mrs. Patterson could not produce anything legitimate. When asked about the forensic accounting results showing personal profit by board members, she claimed those were administrative fees for professional services. Most damaging of all, when a reporter asked if she would be willing to submit to a handwriting analysis to verify the signatures on the authorization documents, she refused and ended the press conference. Our third strategy was to pursue personal liability for the board members. Under normal circumstances, HOA board members are protected from personal lawsuits by insurance and legal immunity. But when board members commit intentional crimes for personal profit, those protections disappear. Rebecca filed personal lawsuits against Mrs. Patterson and the 3 other board members who had participated in the scheme. We were seeking not just the stolen money, but punitive damages, attorney fees, and seizure of personal assets to satisfy the judgment. They thought they could hide behind the HOA corporate structure, Rebecca explained. But when you commit crimes in your official capacity, you become personally liable for all the damages you cause. The personal lawsuits had an immediate effect. 2 of the board members hired their own attorneys and began distancing themselves from Mrs. Patterson. Cracks were starting to show in their united front. Our fourth strategy was the most satisfying. We were going to make them face their victims. Rebecca arranged for depositions of all the board members, where they would have to testify under oath about their actions. More importantly, we invited every property owner who had been victimized by the HOA to attend and observe the proceedings. The depositions were scheduled for December, giving us time to build our case and gather additional evidence. But the HOA was not going down without a fight. Their response to our multi-pronged attack was to escalate their harassment campaign against me personally. They filed a lawsuit claiming that my organic farming operation was contaminating groundwater and threatening public health. They reported me to the IRS, claiming I was not paying proper taxes on my farming income. They even filed a complaint with the state agriculture department, alleging that I was operating an unlicensed commercial farm. Every allegation was false, but each one required time and money to defend against. They were trying to bleed me dry with legal fees while they dragged out the main lawsuit. "This is witness intimidation," Rebecca said. "They are trying to punish you for standing up to them, but every false complaint they file is additional evidence of malicious conduct." She was right. Their harassment campaign was backfiring spectacularly. Every fraudulent complaint generated more negative media coverage. Every false allegation made their eventual punishment more severe. More importantly, it was generating sympathy and support from the community. Local farmers started stopping by to offer encouragement. Customers at the farmers' market were specifically seeking out my produce to show their support. A local newspaper wrote an editorial calling for criminal prosecution of the HOA leadership. The turning point came in November when the county prosecutor announced they were filing felony charges against Mrs. Patterson and 2 other board members for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The charges carried potential prison sentences and mandatory restitution. Suddenly, the HOA's insurance company was willing to discuss settlement. Their criminal defense attorneys were advising them to minimize their civil liability, and their remaining supporters in the community were abandoning them as the full scope of their criminal behavior became public. But I was not interested in a quiet settlement anymore. They had declared war on me personally, and I intended to finish what they started. The depositions would proceed as scheduled. The criminal charges would move forward, and every penny they had stolen would be returned with interest and penalties. They had taught me something important about dealing with bullies and corrupt authorities. The only way to stop them is to fight back harder than they ever expected, longer than they can afford, and more publicly than they can survive. Justice was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. The depositions began on a cold December morning in Rebecca's conference room. Mrs. Patterson arrived with 2 attorneys, looking confident despite everything that had happened. That confidence would not last long. Rebecca started with the basics. How long had Mrs. Patterson been HOA president? When did the rental program begin? Who authorized the use of my property? Mrs. Patterson's answers were careful and rehearsed. She claimed the HOA board had good faith belief that they had proper authorization. She insisted that all actions were taken in the best interests of the community. Then Rebecca produced the forged signature documents. "Mrs. Patterson, is this your signature on this authorization form?" "No, that appears to be Mr. Johnson's signature." "And you witnessed Mr. Johnson sign this document?" A pause. "I believe so, yes." Rebecca placed a calendar on the table. "This document is dated March 15th of last year. Can you tell me where you met with Mr. Johnson on that date?" Another pause, longer this time. "I do not recall the specific location." "Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Johnson's credit card records show he was in Denver, Colorado on March 15th of last year. He did not return home until March 22nd. How could you have witnessed him sign a document when he was 800 miles away? The room went silent. Mrs. Patterson's attorneys were whispering urgently in her ear. "I may have been mistaken about the date," she finally said. Rebecca smiled. "Let us try a different approach. This is a copy of the signature from Mr. Johnson's driver's license. This is the signature on the authorization document. Do these look like the same signature to you?" Even from across the table, the differences were obvious. The forged signature was clearly written by someone trying to copy my name without having any practice doing it. "I am not a handwriting expert," Mrs. Patterson said. "That is fortunate for you," Rebecca replied, "because we hired one. Would you like to see their report?" The handwriting analysis was devastating. Not only was the signature an obvious forgery, but the expert had identified characteristics that suggested it was written by someone left-handed. "I am right-handed. Mrs. Patterson is left-handed." Rebecca spent the next 2 hours methodically destroying every lie Mrs. Patterson had told. She produced bank records showing the rental income going directly into accounts controlled by board members. She showed internal emails where Mrs. Patterson joked about stupid property owners who never pay attention. She presented testimony from contractors who had been hired to prepare my property for events without my knowledge. But the most damaging moment came when Rebecca asked about the harassment campaign against me. "Mrs. Patterson, did you file a complaint with the county claiming that Mr. Johnson's farm was in violation of zoning regulations?" "Yes, we had legitimate concerns about commercial activity in a residential area." "Did you know that Mr. Johnson's property is not subject to county zoning regulations because it predates the zoning ordinances by 40 years?" "I was not aware of that specific detail." "Did you research the zoning regulations before filing the complaint?" "I relied on staff to handle those details." "Mrs. Patterson, you are the staff. You personally signed the complaint. Did you research the regulations or not?" "I may not have researched them thoroughly." Rebecca produced a stack of documents. "These are copies of 14 separate complaints you filed against Mr. Johnson with various government agencies over the past 6 months. Zoning violations, tax evasion, health department violations, agricultural permit violations. Were any of these complaints based on actual evidence of wrongdoing?" Mrs. Patterson's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Rebecca had documented a systematic campaign of harassment using false allegations filed with government agencies. "Mrs. Patterson, what was the purpose of filing all these complaints against Mr. Johnson?" "We had legitimate concerns about his activities." "Or were you trying to punish him for challenging your illegal rental scheme?" "I object to that characterization." "Mrs. Patterson, in your email dated September 15th, you wrote, and I quote, 'We need to make this guy's life so miserable he gives up and goes away.' Do you remember writing that email?" The color drained from Mrs. Patterson's face. That email had been discovered during the forensic accounting investigation, buried in thousands of other documents they had been required to produce. "I may have been frustrated at the time." Frustrated enough to abuse your official position to file false complaints against someone who was trying to recover his stolen property. The deposition continued for 8 hours. By the end, Mrs. Patterson had been caught in dozens of lies, contradictions, and admissions of criminal conduct. Her attorneys were visibly uncomfortable, and she was barely holding herself together. But the real explosion came during the second board member's deposition the following week. David Chen, the HOA treasurer, decided to save himself by throwing everyone else under the bus. When Rebecca asked about his role in the rental scheme, he immediately admitted everything. "Look, this was all Margaret's idea," he said. "She said we could make money for the HOA by using vacant properties in the area. She handled all the details. I just processed the payments." "Mr. Chen, did you know that the property owners had not given permission for their properties to be used?" "Margaret said she had handled all the legal stuff. I assumed it was legitimate." "But you personally received payments from the rental income, correct?" "Margaret said those were consulting fees for financial management services." "How much did you personally receive from the rental of Mr. Johnson's property?" "About $8,000 over 18 months." Rebecca leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, $8,000 for what services exactly?" "I maintained the financial records and processed the rental payments." "You mean you helped launder the proceeds from stolen property?" His attorney objected, but the admission was already on the record. David Chen had just confessed to receiving $8,000 from the illegal rental of my property. The third board member, Susan Walsh, took a different approach. She hired her own attorney and negotiated immunity in exchange for her testimony against Mrs. Patterson and the other board members. Her deposition was the final nail in the coffin. Susan detailed how Mrs. Patterson had approached her with the community enhancement plan, how they had researched properties with absentee owners, and how they had systematically forged documents to create the appearance of legal authorization. "Margaret said it was a win-win situation," Susan testified. "She said the property owners were not using their land productively, so we were actually helping them by generating income." "Did Mrs. Patterson ever mention sharing that income with the property owners?" Rebecca asked. "No, she said the income would go to the HOA to reduce dues for residents. But then she started paying herself management fees and paying the other board members consulting fees." So the rental income was not being used to reduce resident dues. No, it was being divided among the board members as personal compensation. The depositions created a complete record of the conspiracy. Mrs. Patterson had conceived and organized the scheme. David Chen had processed the money and taken his cut. Susan Walsh had provided legal cover by creating fake documents, and all of them had participated in the harassment campaign designed to silence me. But the most explosive moment came during Mrs. Patterson's second deposition, when Rebecca confronted her with evidence of the expanded criminal enterprise. "Mrs. Patterson, how many properties besides Mr. Johnson's farm were included in your rental program?" She looked at her attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "I believe there were 4 properties total." Rebecca placed photographs on the table. "This is the Henderson Horse Farm. This is the Mitchell lakefront property. This is the Williams Orchard. Were you renting out all of these properties without the owner's permission?" "We had authorization documents for all of them." "Forged authorization documents?" "I dispute that characterization." Rebecca produced handwriting analysis reports for all 4 properties. Every single authorization document had been forged, and the handwriting characteristics matched Mrs. Patterson's writing patterns. "Mrs. Patterson, the total rental income from all 4 properties was over $200,000. How much of that money did you personally keep?" The question hung in the air like a bomb. $200,000. They had not just stolen from me. They had operated a criminal enterprise that had stolen over $200,000 from property owners throughout the county. I received reasonable compensation for my management services, she finally said. $47,000 over 2 years. Does that sound reasonable for managing stolen property? Her attorney called for a recess, but the damage was done. Mrs. Patterson had just admitted to personally profiting $47,000 from stolen property rental income. When the depositions were completed, Rebecca and I had a complete confession from multiple defendants, documented proof of the conspiracy, and evidence of systematic theft totaling over $200,000. The HOA board members had destroyed themselves under oath. Every lie they told was contradicted by documentary evidence. Every excuse they offered was demolished by their own internal communications. Every attempt to minimize their responsibility was undermined by their own testimony. The local media had covered the depositions extensively, and public opinion had turned completely against the HOA leadership. Residents were demanding their resignation. The county prosecutor was preparing additional felony charges, and the state attorney general was investigating whether this pattern of behavior existed in other HOAs throughout the state. But I was not done yet. The depositions had given me everything I needed to demand complete justice, not just financial recovery. Mrs. Patterson and her co-conspirators had spent months trying to destroy my life with false complaints and harassment. They had stolen my property, forged my signature, and treated my life's work as their personal piggy bank. The final settlement negotiations took place in February, 9 months after I had discovered that business card on my kitchen counter. But these were not really negotiations anymore. They were surrender terms. Mrs. Patterson and the other board members were facing criminal charges that could send them to prison for up to 10 years. Their personal assets were frozen to ensure restitution payments, and the civil lawsuit was seeking damages that would bankrupt them personally, even if they avoided jail time. Their insurance company had completely abandoned them after determining that intentional criminal acts voided their coverage. They were paying for their own legal defense, and their attorneys were billing them at premium rates for what everyone knew was a hopeless case. The final settlement required them to pay me every penny they had stolen, plus interest, plus punitive damages, plus all of my attorney fees. The total came to $137,000 from my property alone. But the money was just the beginning. Mrs. Patterson was forced to resign from the HOA board in disgrace. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 18 months in prison plus 5 years of probation. Her personal assets, including her house, were seized to pay restitution to all the victims. David Chen received a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation, but he still faced 6 months in jail and was required to pay back every penny he had received from the stolen rental income. Susan Walsh avoided jail time due to her immunity agreement, but she was forced to pay substantial civil damages and was banned from serving on any HOA board for the rest of her life. The fourth board member, who had not participated directly in the rental scheme but had helped with the harassment campaign, was removed from the board and faced civil liability for his role in filing false complaints against me. But my favorite part of the settlement was the public accountability measures. The HOA was required to send a written apology to every resident, admitting that the board had engaged in criminal activity and acknowledging that I had been the victim of an organized theft scheme. They had to publish the apology in the local newspaper and post it on their website for 1 full year. They were also required to implement new oversight procedures to prevent future board corruption, including mandatory background checks for board members and independent auditing of all HOA finances. Most satisfying of all, they had to remove all references to my property from their marketing materials and issue public retractions of every false complaint they had filed against me with government agencies. The criminal case had broader implications beyond my personal situation. The state attorney general used the evidence from our case to investigate similar schemes in HOAs throughout the state. They discovered that property theft by corrupt HOA boards was more common than anyone had realized. New state legislation was passed requiring HOAs to carry higher insurance coverage and subjecting board members to personal criminal liability for misuse of their authority. The law was nicknamed the Johnson Act by local media, though I had nothing to do with nomming it. But the most meaningful outcome was not legal or financial. It was the restoration of my peace and the vindication of my decision to fight back. I used part of the settlement money to make improvements to my farm that I had been planning for years. I expanded my greenhouse operation, added solar panels to reduce my energy costs, and even built a small farm stand to sell directly to customers. The irony was not lost on me that the money the HOA had stolen from my property was now being used to make my property more successful than ever. I also established a legal defense fund to help other property owners who faced similar situations. Too many people give up when confronted by corrupt authorities because they cannot afford to fight back. I wanted to make sure that other victims would have the resources to pursue justice. The farm itself has never been more productive or beautiful. The gardens that were once trampled by unauthorized visitors are now thriving. The pastures that were damaged by illegal events have been restored to better condition than ever. Every morning when I walk through my fields, I remember what it felt like to discover that strangers had been profiting from my life's work. But I also remember what it felt like to fight back and win. The experience taught me something important about dealing with corruption and abuse of authority. Bullies and thieves count on their victims being too intimidated, too overwhelmed, or too isolated to fight back effectively. But when you document everything, hire competent legal help, and refuse to be intimidated by their harassment tactics, even the most arrogant criminals will eventually face justice. Mrs. Patterson and her co-conspirators thought they were safe because they were hiding behind official positions and legal-sounding justifications. They thought I would be too busy farming to notice their theft, too unsophisticated to understand their schemes, and too intimidated to challenge their authority. They were wrong on all counts. The HOA residents who were not involved in the criminal scheme have actually become good neighbors. Many of them were horrified to learn what their board members had been doing and were supportive of my fight for justice. Some even shop at my farm stand now and have become regular customers. The new HOA board has been completely transparent and professional in all their dealings. They have apologized repeatedly for the actions of their predecessors and have worked hard to rebuild trust with the broader community. As I write this, it has been 2 years since I found that business card on my kitchen counter. Mrs. Patterson is still in prison. My farm is more successful than ever, and I sleep soundly every night knowing that justice was served. But the most important lesson I learned was not about legal strategy or criminal justice. It was about the importance of standing up for yourself when powerful people try to take advantage of you. They had every advantage: official positions, legal resources, community connections, and the assumption that I would be too intimidated to fight back. But they underestimated something crucial about people who build their lives from nothing. When you have worked 15 years to create something meaningful, when you have sacrificed everything to build your dreams, you do not just give up when someone tries to steal it from you. You fight back. You document everything. You hire the best help you can afford, and you do not stop until justice is done. Because some things are worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. My farm was worth fighting for. My dignity was worth fighting for. And the principle that corrupt authorities cannot just take whatever they want was definitely worth fighting for.